All right. Hello, everybody. I already see people popping off in the chat, which is really fantastic. Thank you for joining me for Skeptic Haven's Let's Talk Sunday evening call-in show. I'm your host for the evening, Sydney Davis Jr. Jr. I'm about to be joined by my friend Aron. It's going to be a really fantastic discussion about some very important topics that I don't feel like we hear covered enough. So that being said, let's get that theme song rolling and hit the show.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
All right. Aron, how are you today?
Doing well, doing well.
Excellent.
You?
I'm doing fantastic. Also, happy birthday to your snake. It's his second birthday today, everybody in the chat. So give it up. And what was his name, Durango?
Durango is 2 years old today, yes.
Happy birthday, Durango. And Durango is a bull snake, everybody. So show some respect. So Aron, thank you for joining me today. Oh, people may not know this, but backstage a couple of months ago at a different live stream, we were talking about the importance of death with dignity. This idea that in some states in the United States, people can, once they have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, they have the ability to basically schedule their euthanization at a time that works best for them. And so we also talked a little bit about how that should be considered pro-life, the idea that you can kind of pick and choose when you do or do not want to suffer with a terminal illness. And so, yeah, so I just wanted to kind of introduce that idea to the audience. That's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. What is actually pro-life versus what quote unquote pro-life ideas we find are actually pro-birth, but don't actually sustain life, and they don't actually help anybody who is currently alive, as opposed to the idea of people or the these unborn children that people like to discuss a lot when they talk about pro-life. But what exposure have you had to this idea of death with dignity? Like, what are your thoughts on the idea of being able to choose one's own euthanization date?
Well, my wife and I have been discussing for years. I mean, I'm 60 years old now, and I remember my wife had brought up this idea years ago that we should move to someplace like Washington or Oregon or someplace like that where they have death with dignity. And the reason that she suggested this is that this is going to be a painful story, but there's no way around it given the topic.
Right.
So she had a boxer, a dog. And boxers it's her favorite breed. We have another boxer again, but she had this boxer, and they're prone to cancer, and so we take it to the vet, and they say that this is inoperable. The only thing we can do is keep it comfortable for a little while, but we're going to end up having to put it down. And so the boxers get brought into the vet, and the people, my wife and I are both there. We're petting the dog, we're hugging, and we're loving the dog as they roll on too much anesthetic. And the dog simply goes to sleep. Now, if anybody's gone in for any kind of surgery that requires a general anesthetic, you see them roll on the anesthetic and everything's fine. You don't feel everything. You think you're impervious, and then suddenly you're just gone.
Yes.
And then 5 hours later, or whatever it is, you wake up and there's no pain and there's no memory and there's no dreams. You didn't exist for the last 5 hours or so. Well, death is the same thing, except that you don't come back. You just simply don't exist. There's no dream. There's no consciousness. You don't think, feel, remember. You're not aware of anything. It's not that you're asleep. You're simply off.
Yes.
You don't exist anymore.
Unplugged.
Now, yeah. So slightly different, a different species in the family. My granddaughter was diagnosed with an adult form of leukemia at 3 years old.
Wow.
No, I take that back. At a few months old, she
Wow.
was diagnosed with leukemia. And she spent the next 3 years of her life in Children's Medical Center. So they would treat her. She would get over the leukemia, and there's this miracle thing. Well, we're all so happy about that. And then she gets out, And then a few months later, there's a relapse. And every time there's this thing called evolution, wherein there's adaptation to the treatment that's being used, and so the chemotherapy is less effective every time.
Yes.
So they tell you that when you come back with a relapse, that your chances of survival are savagely diminished.
That's
But
so
she made
sad.
it twice.
Wow.
She survived.
Wow.
And then there was a third relapse
Mm.
that was preceded by something called Jacobson's disorder, which is just horrific, which is the body's reaction to having gone through too much chemotherapy,
Ugh.
wherein you have huge blisters developing on the inside of your body from all of the poisonous toxins that you had to take in.
Ugh.
Are you really
Okay.
going to have an attitude right now? Stop
He's
it.
like, I don't want to hear this.
Oh.
This is depressing. This is sad.
Yeah.
He's like, it's my birthday.
It is a little bit.
Yeah.
It is a little bit.
Yeah.
But so on the third, or the second relapse, I should say, expectations were low.
I bet.
And they said that at some point, they said that the chemo is not even slowing it down anymore. And so they told my daughter that the only thing you can do is to keep her comfortable as much as possible. And what they mean by that is that you've got 4 or 5 days that she can still be that person.
Yep.
And after that, she's going to be in pain. She's going to be uncomfortable. She's going to be terrible. She's going to be depressed. It'll be an awful thing for you to endure.
Yes.
And then it gets worse from there. So with a human, what they told my daughter to do with her 3-year-old daughter was, you stay with her. There's a point where the oxygen level is so low that she's going to go to sleep and not wake up again. And the breathing will be increasingly labored as there is less and less oxygen in the blood. And it just keeps getting worse. And I've heard this with my own ears. Before she was diagnosed, I got to babysit her one night and I realized that there's something severely wrong here.
Right.
And my daughter said, well, we've taken her to the doctor. The doctor says it's a flu or whatever. I'm like, no, this is not a flu. This is something, This is something else.
Yeah.
You got to take her and get her checked out. But so what they're telling is, just imagine listening to severely labored breathing from a small child.
Yeah.
And you're expecting, because the breathing is so labored, that you're expecting it to stop.
Yep.
And the doctors are telling my daughter to live with that until the breathing stops. Tell a young mother that this is the best you can do.
Right.
For a child. And just, let's not think about because the child was gone 2 days ago.
Right.
That now we're dealing just with the mother now and having to listen. Can you imagine?
Not even. I can't.
Would do to I can't imagine what it would do to me.
Right. Yeah.
To feel for when the breathing stops and you feel relieved. And how horrible does that make you feel about yourself, because you can't endure this punishment anymore? The dog got a better exit from this world than we get.
Yes, 100%. 100%. That is what I found, and what I continue to find the most interesting about this topic is that when I was a kid, we always had pre-owned animals. We always rescued animals. I don't think my parents got a puppy until I was already in college. And I remember all the conversations about how we need to put this dog down because they're losing their quality of life. Or when my iguana could no longer climb, it's like, that's his purpose in life. That's his joy. We need to put him down. He's no longer enjoying life. It was considered a humane thing to do, to look at your animal and say, you don't have a quality of life. Let's put you down before you suffer. And we all had like examples of people that we knew who left their animals alive way too long. And yet when you have that exact same discussion with people, when you say this person who has been diagnosed with this terminal illness, they know it's terminal, they can do the research, they know what it's going to look like, they know what they're in for. They might have even in some instances had relatives with the exact same illness, so they knew exactly what that looked like. For whatever reason, the exact same part of human beings that say, we need to put our dog down so that it doesn't suffer, tells them, no, don't put a human down. Don't let a human being put themselves out. We've got medical care. I remember doing research for this. A lot of the arguments against it were, but there's palliative care, there's painkillers. And what they're saying is it's better to have somebody alive against their will who's not even going to remember these days at all anyway, because they're so medicated that they probably aren't even awake. It's better to do that because at least the family gets to, I don't know, sit there, than to let them say, I know I've got this illness. There's nothing we can do about that. I would rather put a date on it, have a goodbye party, decide when my time is, and my body, my choice, basically. And I've never understood why anybody else should get a say in whether or not you choose to remain alive. And the important part about this is I just want to read a couple of criteria that you have to meet. So we're not saying, anybody should just be able to stick a syringe in anybody else and get rid of them at any time just because they have a terminal illness. Some of the criteria that I found on Oregon.gov, because Oregon in 1997 established the Death with Dignity Act. So you are allowed to euthanize yourself essentially in Oregon. The criteria is there has to be 2 oral requests to a doctor within 15 days apart to whoever is your attending physician. You have to have been able to make those requests orally yourself. It can't be made from anybody else's perspective, because another argument was, well, what if your family just wants to put you down because you're trouble? That can't happen. You have to be the one to request it. Then both the attending and consulting physician must confirm your diagnosis and your prognosis, so they know for a fact that you are terminal and there's really nothing else to do about it. Then both attending and consulting physician must agree that your cognitive abilities support the understanding of what it is that you're requesting. And if they even slightly disagree with one another on whether or not you have the cognitive ability to make that request, you have to undergo a psychological exam first before they're willing to allow you this death with dignity. And then the patient must be informed of feasible alternatives, including pain control, hospice, and comfort care. So you are educated on what your other options are. And then the only exemption they make for that 15-day, you have to make 2 requests in 15 days, is if you are diagnosed with something that gives you less than 15 days left to live. So it's not this idea that anybody can just walk in off the street and say, hey, put me down, my girlfriend broke up with me, or something like that, which everybody tries to make it sound like when it comes to voting for these bills and supporting these bills. But there's a lot of regulation to this idea. And so that's what we're talking about today, is this idea that it is regulated. It's not just anybody can put anybody down. You can take your grandma to the hospital when you're tired of taking care of her. You can get depressed for one day and drink too much and go to the hospital and be put down. None of that is feasible with this legislation or with these rules.
And another quick comparison, to people and dogs. I had to put down another dog just a few months ago, and this one was very old. And I saved her when she was a very young puppy. I saved her in the pound. She was on the day that she was supposed to be executed, put down the lethal injection kind of thing. I saved her on that last day. We adopted that dog, and she lived with us for 14 years or so.
Yeah.
But by the end of that, I've got her on pain meds. I've taken her to the vet a number of times. They've given her a number of different prescriptions for different types of pain meds. But I can't sleep because I'm hearing her whine because she can't sleep because she's in pain.
Yes.
And with all these pain meds, she can't sleep because she's in pain.
Yeah.
And I note this symptom and this other symptom and these other symptoms, and they just seem to be piling up. And I take the dog to the vet, and they say, yeah, she's got this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. You've got mounting medications that we're going to have to do. And the biopsy came back, and yes, it's cancer.
Yep.
And it's almost a relief at this point.
Yeah.
Because Okay, that's the deciding factor where we're just all that the pain meds are not working. They haven't been working. She's been suffering this whole time. She can't walk. She can't. It's awful.
Yeah.
You know, and there's so many. I'm not going to get into detail, but we're talking about an old dog that is aging prematurely now,
Mm-hmm.
and so we had to put that second dog down. Now, I have one member of my family who is currently in a nursing home with dementia.
Mm.
Called me at 4:00 in the morning to tell me that she went out with friends and got a new puppy, but can't find the puppy now that she's awake. That's just because you never had a puppy. That's because that was a dream, and you can't tell dreams from reality anymore. And everything they say is unconnected to reality at all.
Right.
Now, think about for myself, I don't want to ever be
Right.
where I'm so unconnected to reality that I don't know when the dream stops and when and where the reality is. And I don't want, if you know in advance that this is chronic, that it's going to advance, that it's going to become a completely debilitating situation, that it's going to be costly both financially and emotionally to your family, and there's nothing they can do to stop it.
Yep.
But we could just avoid it. I think that's the better option.
Yeah.
My dad
100%.
got the best death of anybody that anybody ever gets. He had some forewarning. They put him in the hospital. He's got emphysema. They gave him a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be gone in a couple of days. He had just enough time for the relatives to round up me and my mom and a few other people that he knew, and so he had a room full of people who loved and respected him. His kids, all his ex-wives. Just imagine the sort of man who all the ex-wives show up,
Right.
at their deathbed. And he knew that he was going to be put on these medications, that he's going to be hallucinating, that he's not going to have his presence of mind.
Yep.
And he didn't want to be remembered that way. He would rather, think about this, he would rather die alone than to have anyone see him in a compromised state. So when he thought he saw a hallucination on the wall, he kicked everybody out.
Yep.
And it's a moving thing for me, because I gave him the first hug as I left the room first, and everybody else gave their respects and everything. And I went outside and I realized I had left my jacket in that room, and I had to go back. I have to leave. I have to go get my jacket.
Yeah.
So now I've come back and everybody's given their last hug, and I'm like, I had to come back and get my jacket, and I'm going to get one more hug. And my dad said, "I'll give you the last one I got." It was hours, not days.
Mm-hmm.
We'd barely made it to the house. And I like to think that what happened, a merciful doctor, I think, would have, when they're rolling on this opiate-based medication, just nudged that a bit too much.
Mm-hmm.
Why make somebody suffer?
Right.
You're on medication, psychotic medication, so that you don't realize how much you're suffering.
Right.
But is that really the way to treat an intelligent being?
Not at all.
To make them suffer a nightmare for days while they're dying, and they know it? Why not just where's the morality in that? Wouldn't the morality be, we can't stop this, but you know what? We can finish it.
Right. Right.
Let's just do that, like right now.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if somebody calls themselves pro-life, shouldn't that mean also pro-quality of life? It shouldn't be about keeping you alive regardless of the sake of anything else. It should be about giving you that dignity that you deserve in life. And Cindy says, So if we fight to have mental health considered at the same level as physical health, should we also advocate for death with dignity when you have a mental disease non-responsive to any treatment? So I think that's what comes into play when they talk about the idea that both the supporting and attending physician, or I think consulting and attending physician, have to be able to identify whether or not they think you are cognitively aware enough to make that decision. But that does pose an interesting question. Should somebody be suffered to live just because they can't cognitively make the decision to put themselves down? And then what would that look like? For example, would there be some sort of right that we give family members to control that afterward? Would they have to amend the laws to say that the person you gave this basically power of attorney to can make that call? I feel like they have something similar nowadays where it's like, do we pull the plug? Do we leave people in a coma? But that is an interesting question. What would we do for people with cognitive impairments as opposed to physical impairments?
Yeah, the people who are pro-life are never pro-quality of life.
No, they are not.
But let's just remember this. They want
Yes.
you to suffer as long as possible, just like Mother Teresa did. She wanted her people to suffer as much as possible. That's why they're all for birth, right? On the
Pro-birth.
abortion issue, they're
Yes.
pro-birth, but they also want to deny all the programs for women and infant
Yes.
children. They want to deny free public education. They want to deny free lunches in public education.
Yep.
They want to deny everybody everything that would give them quality of life.
Exactly. I literally made a
And
list.
make those
Yep.
kids suffer so that I live in Texas, where we have like 25% of our children are below the poverty line. And this
Yep.
is because of a systemic condition that has been put in place to keep it that way.
Yep. 100%. 100%. It's pro-birth, not pro-life. For example, pro-life individuals would advocate for cheaper or free healthcare. They wouldn't want things like cancer to bankrupt individuals and ruin their life before they even die of their terminal illness. They would support government programs.
The pro-life people also want to cut Medicare and Medicaid.
That's literally next on my list. Yeah, Medicare, Medicaid, WIC for women, infants, and children. Absolutely. So it's like they want to make sure that that fetus makes it to the planet. But then once that's done, you should have thought about that before you opened your legs or whatever. It's their
Once you're born, you're fucked.
Fuck you. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Toy Soldier says chronic pain, chronic PTSD. So I would just have to suffer because it's not terminal. That's actually a great point. And I think if you have that cognitive ability, like they said, if they can determine that you are cognitively aware enough to make that decision for yourself, I personally don't understand what the issue would be. If you meet the parameters that they're asking and you can cognitively make that decision, I don't think it's anybody's job to tell you you can't make those decisions for yourself, as long as they can prove that you are willingly making that decision for yourself and you know exactly what it is you're signing up for. I think that's a great point. I think people who suffer mentally and emotionally should be offered a similar system. And then Skeptics and Scoundrels says, people thoughtlessly proclaim life must be preserved no matter what the cost, and then never actually consider what life is and what is the cost. Exactly. The cost is financially a lot of money, and emotionally and physically just suffering until you either just stop breathing, or like you said, a kind doctor just happens to maybe push a little medication in more than they're supposed to.
Which, by the way, is a felony.
Right.
It's the only moral thing to do, but that's a felony.
Yep, absolutely. And I actually found some data that supports whether or not the program would benefit us economically as well, whether there's a positive economic impact by letting people decide their own, I don't want to, it sounds coarse saying this, but their own termination date, I suppose we could call it. So Canada did a study where they determined how much money they would save as a nation economically if they allowed people to make this decision for themselves. And they found that medically assisted death could reduce annual healthcare spending in the United States up to 138.6 million Canadian dollars, which is 101 million American dollars, whereas the program itself would only cost between 1.5 million and $14 million. And they did stress that they were not doing this to encourage people to end their lives in order to make economic progress and save themselves money. But I found that to be interesting, that it would save us that much money if we just allowed people to make that decision for themselves. We're not even talking about rounding up all the sick old people and just getting rid of them. I remember there were a couple of conversations like that during COVID that made it on television, which was shocking. But we're talking about allowing people to make that decision on their own. And then
Yeah, I think
Thomas,
it's funny that suicide is illegal and you can get a life sentence for it.
isn't that crazy? A light sentence. I feel like that was a joke that just like went over my head. I was like, wait a second, get a light sentence for it. Hey, hold on. Also, let's see, life insurance policy. Speaking of which, though, one of the questions was, would life insurance cover this? And with the status quo currently, life insurance policies can still consider it suicide, even if the patient is already terminal. So life insurances, surprise, are still going to be pieces of shit about the whole thing. They're like, oh, you decided to end your life because you didn't want to suffer. We only pay out if you suffer. So,
supper.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just interesting to me that people can make that distinction where you're like, do you want your dog to be incontinent and blind and weak and sad? No, I don't. I want to put him down before then. Okay, what about your grandma? Can she make that decision? Oh, no, she needs to stay with us for whatever reason.
Yeah, I know a couple of examples of people who lost their mother years before the mother actually died.
Yes.
And their situation was far worse than mine. So I know a couple of people who, pair of brothers who had to change their mother's diapers.
Yep.
She's bedridden. She's not just incapacitated. She's not there.
Not there.
Her eyes will be open for some hours of the day, but there's no response to anything. They can talk to her all they want to, but she's never going to glance their way. There's just nothing going on up there. So imagine two guys sharing shifts, changing your mother's diapers for 6 years, doing the intravenous feedings and watering, and there's nobody in there.
Nobody. Yep.
Right. There's just nothing going on in mom at all. But you're going to do that for a half a dozen years.
Yep.
Until she finally stops.
Yes.
And we were told, hey, this is a similar situation. She's just had this somebody in my family with the same situation, and you're going to be. This is how it's going to affect your family. This is going to be life changing. Everybody's going to have to give up your jobs and hobbies because this is what you do now. So you're going to have to take shifts taking care of this person for 24 hours a day, every day, until she stops living. And everything she says is going to be crazy, and nobody's going to understand anything she says because nothing makes sense. And that's just where you're going to be. Now, if you had Medicare, that would have been something else. And I said, just applied for it yesterday, got the app in yesterday, already before this meeting. And they said, oh, well, never mind. Scratch everything I just said then. We'll just leave her here. She'll be taken care of. Dodged a bullet.
Yeah. And then you hear about, meanwhile, in other countries, like in Switzerland, where they've had this program available because they're like, why wouldn't we? This is the most humane thing to do for people. You read articles about young people who are in their mid-20s, early 30s, and they find out they have a terminal illness. So they're able to set a date and then throw a party and then say their goodbyes and then write out their will. And they make it a transition into the life that they know they're leaving behind for their loved ones. They get a say in what is it like when I go? How early do I go? What am I supposed to be paying for? What is my family no longer responsible for? Here is me giving away what I want each person to have. It's so much more dignified than this idea of, I'm just going to sit here. Who knows when you're actually going to let me, go. If you decide to hang on to me for longer or not, that's up to you, I guess, now. And it's just interesting that they want to take the right out of the person's hands and instead put it in their family members' hands, when the family is almost always going to say, no, please hang on longer.
Now, at the risk of sounding cold, I understand why insurance companies would not pay
Yeah.
in the situation where you chose death with dignity. They're only going to pay when you die without dignity,
Right.
or,
They're like,
or
dignity, what's that?
when you die by surprise.
Yeah.
But it's a small price to pay, I think. That,
Yeah.
okay, well, we'll have to make the last payments on your house, or we'll have to sell your house or whatever, and nobody's getting an inheritance out of you. We got to cover your, whatever you still owe that can be pushed against anybody else in your family, which fortunately that's rarely an issue. But nobody comes out getting any richer out of the death of this loved one.
Yeah.
But when you know that, okay, this is a progressive situation, that this is going to get worse. It's going to get progressively worse. It's going to become more and more painful. The painkillers aren't going to be able to be effective. It's going to be disfiguring. That within a year from now, you may think you may be doing relatively well now, but we know that a year from now, you're going to be suffering and you're going to be in anguish, and you're not going to be in a clear mental state anymore either.
Mhm.
And everybody in your family, this is how they will remember you. Think about that.
Yes.
How will they remember you? I tell you, I remember my dad, the good and bad that he did in his life. There's a lot of things that I remember that my dad did that was dumb or whatever. And I also had moments of respect for my dad. But I tell you, one of the top ones was his deathbed. He took
Yes.
that like a man.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so,
yeah, and that last image of people is exactly why I never walk up to a casket when I'm at a funeral, because I want to remember people the way they were, the way they would want me to remember them, not how they look in that moment. We
yeah.
actually have a caller, so I'm going to hit the little talk button. All right. Shane, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I sure can. What questions do you have for us?
Great. So I kind of wanted to talk more about the regulations a little bit. One of the things I wanted to ask was, like, what if this, oh, sorry, my daughter is making noise. Sorry. So one of the things I wanted to ask was, what if the patient has children that are in their care?
Say that again. I'm so sorry. Did you say if the patient has children in their care?
Yeah, like, say the patient, gets a diagnosis that they're going to die in, I don't know, maybe 6 months or a year or two, but they have, oh, sorry, as you can hear, I have children, but if they have children, is that something that's taken into consideration, as far as who's going to take care of them when they die and that sort of thing, before medically assisted death is, I guess, an option or approved?
I feel like in that case, they would make the same amendments to their child care that they would make regardless of how they were dying. I think if somebody finds out they have a terminal illness, those are kind of the things that they line up, whether they know for a fact what date they're dying because they got to pick it versus knowing that they're dying of something slow that's going to take time. I don't think the adjustments to their will or what they want to happen to their kids would be much different in that instance. If anything, they might be able to plan better and plan accordingly if they were able to set that date themselves and allow that, instead of having to also coordinate who's going to take care of them when they are catatonic at the same time and their kids. They just get to focus on who they want their kids to be with and what they want to happen with their children after they self-euthanize, as opposed to die a slow death. What about you, Aron? What do you think in that instance?
Same.
Yeah. I feel like those same.
When you have the wherewithal to make these decisions, where you're no longer having to entrust a will, you have people in the room say, no, I want you to have this and you to have this. And when you're delegating that, I don't think anybody ever challenges that. There doesn't have to be a written record of it. This is the way you want things done. There are other people in the room that witness this. We're all in agreement. This is what he said. This is the way it'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think to answer your question, it would pretty much be the same way that it would be otherwise. The only difference is you would know exactly when you cease to be alive on this planet for them versus having to guess how long you might have to be in end of life or palliative care and where your kid's going to be then and are they going to see you in that state versus getting to say an official goodbye to them in the state that you want them to remember you in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I did have another question. Well, I guess more of a comment. I think that this death with dignity or medically assisted death should be applied. Oh, sorry. Should be applied to people that are like not just terminally ill, but if they're in really chronic pain or if they're in severe depression that just does not get better. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
All right.
When you're in chronic, I didn't understand the question. You're in chronic pain and you're not going to get any better. That's what we've been saying for the last.
Or mental illness as well. He mentioned like depression that just hasn't responded to any kind of health care or help of any kind.
Right.
Yeah, well, there's the rub. What do you do in the case of dementia? What do you do in the case of dementia? Because that it has to be their choice. Mm-hmm. And if they're unable to make that choice, well, then now we're in a difficult moral situation.
Right.
I fully support that if I'm in this situation and I want out and I want to take the death with dignity and I have the wherewithal to do it, and I know what's going to happen to me. But if I've suffered something, if I've suffered a stroke or whatever, and some subsequent, there's a number of infections that when you get older can affect your mind and launch you into a delirium that then becomes dementia, and then what do you do?
Right.
I'm no longer able to make a good, but at the same time, I've been to that place. There's a whole lot of people that talk to me as if they're talking about, I don't understand what they're saying, and they're not really talking to me. They think I'm somebody else. Somebody thought I was Jesus.
I mean, to be fair, I get those two confused all the time, so I don't blame them. Jesus just doesn't have a blue beard. That's literally the only difference. I don't know any other difference.
Yeah. So, but what do you do with people in that case? And in which case they're still suffering, but you can't take that executive decision away from them.
Right. Right.
Awkward moral dilemma.
Frankenstein says, is this topic divided down the left-right divide? I assume conservatives are restricting the ability to choose with dignity when it comes to passing. Oddly enough, Frankenstein, when I was doing research, I did find that 100% of the cases I found where people voted, for example, in Washington, D.C., they tried to pass the exact same death with dignity that Oregon has, and it was blocked specifically by Republicans because they claimed that it was running counter to ethical prohibitions against suicide, and they framed their pro-life stance around why they don't believe that this should be allowed. And it was actually blocked from being allowed to happen in Washington, D.C. So that's just the facts and evidence. It is very much voted against by Republicans in the instances that there is a vote brought up of whether or not an area should have death with dignity. I will say, I think that there has to be some alternative reason, and I've been doing research on this today, and hopefully I'll be able to find more. There has to be some alternative reason that they want people to stay alive, and I think that's the bigger issue. I think it has nothing to do with pro-life at all, because as we've proven, pro-life isn't pro-life, it's pro-birth. I think it has more to do with they might have done some research on how much money they might lose in certain areas or workers they might lose in certain industries or things like that they need to keep going, so they somehow benefit. Or maybe they have financial stakes in hospitals or medical companies, or say, for example, somebody who has stake in like cancer treatments and things like that. I wouldn't be surprised at all to find out that a lot of these people who vote against death with dignity also have stock or some financial gain by you getting chemotherapy, or by you continuing to need things like insulin. But I wasn't able to find anything in my research today. I just ran out of time, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is something that exists out there. In fact, I wager a bet $10 to anybody who can prove that's not the case. Skeptic Haven's paying, not me. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so I think, I think our caller's gone. I think we dropped him. But I do think in those instances with mental health, I've seen a lot of comments here saying, well, what if you have this? What if you have that? Just because death with dignity should be given to people who are dying of terminal illnesses and they should be allowed to decide when they go does not mean that I don't also believe that people with mental suffering don't deserve that. I just want to throw that out there. Just because I'm saying people with physical terminal illnesses deserve it is not the same as saying that people with mental pain and mental illnesses don't also deserve that grace. I do think they deserve that grace. I also think, though, that the parameters would have to be different given mental illness versus physical illness, because a lot of the way it is now, the current status quo, there is a lot of testing and a lot of psychological exams and things done to make sure that you are mentally cognitive enough to make that decision for yourself. But I don't know what those rules would be. I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, I have a perfect plan for what happens when it's a mental illness versus a physical ailment. But what do you think, Aron? Do you think that people who have mental illnesses deserve the same thing? Do you think there's like a different plan in place that we could put for them? What are your thoughts on that?
You have to be able to make you have to have the wherewithal to be able to make the decision.
Yeah.
And I want to grant that right. I mean, there's a time when, like, with my friends, when their mother hasn't spoken a word in years, and there's clearly no brain activity going on. There's like a wake moment and there's a sleep moment, and when there's no brain activity, do you still have a moral issue in pulling a plug, or is it just that you're pulling the plug and so the life support doesn't work anymore, and so you let them die on their own, because then now you're dying of starvation as well?
That's
why can't we just roll on the anesthetic?
Yes.
If a dog can go down that well with everybody that loves it in the room, and why can't people?
Yes. And there was that famous case, Terry Schiavo, I believe, during the 90s, early 2000s, where she literally lost all cognitive abilities to make decisions for herself and was kept on life support for years. And her husband, I believe, was like vilified in the media for that. Do you remember more about that Terry Schiavo case? That's like just coming to mind. I'm actually going to look it up right now.
Yeah, there was a moment of spasm. There was like years of no activity, and then there's this weird moment of spasm where, if you look at just one part of the video, it looked like maybe she was like fighting for consciousness, but it was not that.
Yes.
And so this is the emotional outrage. This is what people mistake for morality.
Yes.
Whether the woman is not fighting for her life, she hasn't been there.
Right.
Brain activity is gone.
Right.
There's nothing left. Why are we feeding this thing? If you believe that you have an afterlife, maybe we should let you get to it.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And if I'm in a situation where where there is no afterlife, I know that we don't have souls. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a moment when, if there's any way that I could ever come back from that, maybe I'd want to reserve the right if I could. But there's a point where that there's no coming back from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is an interesting point that you raise. Many of the people who vote against these things, these very, very humane ways of dying, they also believe that there's a wonderful afterlife in store for us. So you have to wonder, is it that they maybe aren't 100% sure that is the case, perhaps? Why? Like, what is it that keeps you from wanting to go there sooner if you have that opportunity? It's a very, very interesting question. Let's see. Purple Rhymes with Orange says, yes, I remember that being in the news. It got to be a fight for her husband wanting to let her go versus her mother wanting to keep her on machines. And I remember that. I was in middle school, I think. And I remember thinking, or basically being told by media outlets, that her husband was just the worst person ever. Happy birthday, Snake.
No, this is a different one.
Oh, it's a different one. Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to
My wife just handed me another one. We've
that is
got
a sentence I never thought I'd hear in my life. My wife just handed me a different snake. Um, you would have loved it. I live in Nashville, and 2 days ago, I saw two people walking down the street with gigantic boas around their neck. And I was thinking to myself, I bet nobody's going to ask them for a cigarette or change or anything. They're not going to get approached by anybody, just gigantic snakes. And they were living their best life. So there you go.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm looking at this Cherry Shivo case, and I remember being told that like he was the worst person ever. People were insinuating that like he wanted to put her down so he could get like a new wife, all this stuff. I remember everybody wanted him to be vilified, but now I bet if we go back and revisit that information, we might find that it was actually he just wanted her to die a dignified death. It says right here that he insisted that she would not have wanted to live in that vegetative state. And so he would know better than anybody else would.
So they have these things where you can sign where you want to do not resuscitate.
Yes. Yep.
Right. Now you have to predict while you're healthy
yes.
what the situation might be, which is unfortunate, but hope you predicted correctly, because some people can be in a coma for 10 years, and some people, once they go down, they ain't coming back.
Yep. Farin Salas says, can one know when they are starting to progress into dementia? If so, I think I would be inclined to end it before I lose my faculties. That's actually something I was thinking about earlier. Was there are signs for the beginning of dementia. What I think might be an interesting idea is for somebody to say, 2 years from now, here's my date. And then when that date gets closer, they still have way more cognitive function than they expected to, so they push it back another year. I don't think there's anything wrong with having that spot reserved and pushing it back if you get closer and closer. We're not advocating for, nope, you picked it, that's when you're gone, whether you like it or not. Like that scene in Monty Python where they come to get his organs because he's an organ donor, but he's still alive, and they just like cut his liver out in front of his wife. Like, that's not what we're advocating for.
You donated your liver, but I'm using it.
Yeah. This is your liver donor's card, right? That is. Yep. Fuck. Yeah. So that's like, and what makes me crazy is that here we are, we're saying we think that human beings should be able to die with dignity, knowing they're already terminal. That's the emphasize, knowing they're already terminal, having been confirmed by multiple doctors that they're terminal. There is nothing else other than pain medication that we can do for them. They've already gone through the psychological exam. They've already asked for it twice verbatim by themselves, not through anyone else. And we're still like arguing about that. Why are we still arguing about that?
And here in the United States, where our medical care is predatory.
Yep.
So we pay the highest rates for medication and for hospitalization and for everything else. I mean, because the insurance companies own us, right? The pharmaceutical companies own all of this too. So that's why we're going to pay more. That because, a national healthcare system would be, well, that's socialism, and we can't have that kind of morality. We're too prudish for it.
Yeah. No socialism. We'd rather just exist like this. Yeah. I'd rather just pay $7 for bread and I don't know, whatever else.
What was it Martin Luther King said? It was that the United States was socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor.
Rugged individualism. I like that word. Ooh, rugged individualism. Yeah, and it's also, it goes back to that whole, something I don't understand also for people who would entertain voting against these things is, what is it? Why do they care? Why do they care? Why do legislators get to decide what happens to your grandmother? Why do people in, Washington, D.C. or in our highest courts get to decide what happens to me after I already know what happens to me because I've been diagnosed with this illness? When I was in college, I had a friend who, because of some genetic abnormality, all of her siblings had the exact same terminal illness. And they all suffered with it at varied stages. So she literally got to see what was going to happen to her because it happened to her brothers first. And my thought process is, that sounds like a hellscape. Why would you not want that person to say, okay, my first brother died within 2.5 years. My second brother died within 2.5 years. So 2.5 years from now, I'm going to set my date. Or 2 years from now, I'm going to set my date. Why is there anyone out here saying no to that? That's what I don't understand. Why is it anybody else? So bye, Felicia. If you're mad about it, like her making that
We live in a
decision.
country where a 10-year-old girl can be raped by her AIDS infected father and forced to give birth to a fetus that has been determined to have no brain.
Yep.
So Louis Gohmert, course Republican, what a surprise, demands that even underage rape victims should be forced to give birth to carry to term inviable fetuses, a fetus that has no brain.
Yep.
And therefore cannot survive, because it would be immoral to let the child be a child. The moral thing, according to him, is to force her to undergo this unnecessary distortion of her own underage body for a full-fledged childbirth, all of that.
Yep.
And I get why Louis Gohmert wants that, because if we didn't allow the birth of babies with no brains, then who would continue to vote for Louis Gohmert?
Yep. Yep. And then also the wild part about that is the same exact people who want you to be forced to have these children that aren't going to live past, a certain age, if it's not even detrimental for the mom to give birth to these children. They're the same ones that once that child is born, they're like, you want us to help you with that care? Whoa. Whoa.
And then the argument, the argument for moral outrage, right, where they take the extreme exception and make it out like that's the rule, right? So there was this case where there's conjoined twins. Now, in this case, they're not separable, not for both of them. You can remove one and the other will do just fine.
Yep.
But that one is wholly dependent. And what they realize is, in the case of these conjoined twins, there's the one twin that is going to continue to be a draw on resources for the main twin until they both die. Now, you can separate them and one will live. This one is going to die. There's no way around that. They're either both going to die or this one is going to die. But if this one is going to live, this one's got to die. So we've got this moral dilemma. We can cut this one out and this one can live. But how does the moral majority, the moral outrage people, how do they, the right to life people, how do they sell that?
They say,
well,
should have thought about that
Democrats are promoting birth abortions.
Yeah. Yep.
That's how they sold that.
Yep.
That exact instance. When they said that Democrats advocate for post-birth abortions, that's the case they're talking about.
Yep. I was going to say, I've dated some people who I would advocate post-birth abortions, but never mind. We won't go down that road.
You already did.
Like, I've dated some people where I would definitely vote for them to be a post-birth abortion. That's for sure. Watch me get canceled. You can't get canceled if you never were up there to begin with, if you weren't known for anything or popular for anything to begin with. Let's see here. I don't see that we have anybody calling in at the moment. So if you are listening to this and you have thoughts, opinions, questions, please feel free to give us a call. Also, I'm just going to take a split second to tell you about our patrons. Our patrons are Eric Ozols, Rion, Dean and Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aron Coalson, Phil Calderone, and Amanda McLeod. So if you are interested in supporting us on Patreon, don't forget you are funding these call-in shows and different discussions. We have shows multiple times a week. For example, on Thursdays, we have the Sunny Spot featuring Sunny Shell. Then on Saturdays, there is also the Global Atheists. So also, they're looking for volunteers to work behind the scenes. If you're interested in being a volunteer for Skeptic Haven, please hit them up on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Now I've got that out of the way. There we go. All the ads, all the advertisements. So that being said, in order to say, for example, Death with Dignity is available tomorrow. They say, okay, fine. We give you what you want. We give the left what they want. God damn it. We'll give you those dignified deaths, I guess, much to our chagrin. What do
It
you think?
bothers me. So you framed this in a left versus right thing, and it is very much correct.
I mean, it
It
is.
bothers
Yeah.
me that the right is called the right because all they want is to deprive other people of their rights.
I think about that all the
That's what it's
time.
about. So while the left is trying to preserve and promote rights, the right is trying to take your rights. And somehow
Yes.
they've even demonized advocating human rights. They've demonized it as wokeism.
Wokeism. Yes.
If you care about somebody else's problems that are not you and you don't personally have that problem, well, that means you're woke. And that means that's the worst thing you can be,
The worst.
is concerned about somebody else's problem.
Yep.
There's nothing worse than that.
Now, do you think they would vote for it if we told them we would let all the woke people euthanize themselves? Do you think that would be what got their vote? Do you think if we were like, all the liberals get to go first, kind of like the vaccine waves, wave number 1 is woke leftists, go euthanize yourself.
Okay, so you ask somebody, well, you've got this terminal illness, and there's nothing we can do about it, and you're gonna die in about 9 months. It's gonna be really painful, and there's no pain medication that we can do it. And your children are gonna have to change your diaper. It's gonna be very degrading. You're gonna be hitting on your daughter because you won't know who she is, and you're gonna have all of these other problems. It's gonna be terribly disturbing. Your family's memory of you will be forever ruined. But before I can offer you this choice, who did you vote for in the last election? Oh, okay, so. Only Democrats get death with dignity. You voted against it.
Yep. Oh, sorry, you are not woke enough to know what you're doing. So we're just gonna.
Yeah,
you voted against it.
The platform was that the woke people could euthanize themselves. You've been deprived of that right because you didn't think the rest of them should have that right. So you don't get it.
It's just like I remember reading so many articles at the beginning of like 2017 where people were shocked that their loved ones who were illegal immigrants were getting deported. And they said, I thought that if I voted for him, that meant we were safe. We wouldn't get deported. I thought that if I voted for Trump, he wouldn't deport my loved ones because I voted for him. And you're just like, yo, you have no idea what you're like. Oh my goodness. If only you knew. Let's see here. Oh, we've got a caller. I'm gonna let the caller in. Let's see here. Is this working? Emmanuel, can you hear us?
I can hear you guys perfectly.
Perfect. Awesome. Hit us with it. What's going on?
So, Aron and I have talked before. It's my first time talking to Cindy. I want to talk about the risk of not having faith.
Okay.
And
the risk of what?
It's a possibility risk. It's not a certain risk. So my basic argument,
the risk of not having faith, you said?
Yeah, it's like if I'm a theist and I believe in God, if I die and those things happen not to be real, there's nothing that I will lose. But if I'm a
your sanity, your rationality,
there's a judgment.
You sacrifice certain aspects of your life that you've dedicated to this belief in absolute nonsense. What I've noticed is from the Clergy Project is that people who realize, ministers who've dedicated their entire life to their religion, when they no longer believe, what they've statistically realized is that people walk away from these beliefs. They become more tolerant. They become more curious. They go back to college. They are more liberal. They are just generally better people overall. So the thing that you lose by believing impossible nonsense for no good reason is everything. And what you gain by believing something that is not true is that upon your death, it's still not true.
Yep.
We know that there's no such thing as a soul. Done. If there's no soul, there can be no afterlife. There's no point in God. Done. So what you lose is quite a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And you don't gain anything by believing.
And not only that, but people say that they don't lose anything, but they're actually, when you believe in, especially Christian religions, because so much of it is founded on proselytizing to other people, I don't think you understand how many people you harm through your belief. Unless you're a Christian who never ever leaves the house, never gets on the internet, never calls into call-in shows, never tells anybody about what you believe, you are actively harming other people by trying to convince them that whatever the theology is that you are following is the correct one. So then you end up pressing upon people things like purity culture, things that aren't healthy, and they're very harmful for people's mental health, physical health, emotional health. So you can say all you want that it's just, oh, I'm going to follow it in case it goes somewhere. Worst case scenario, it doesn't. But you are harming so many people along the way, and then causing those people to either believe those things that you're telling them and also find out at the end that it was all worth nothing, right? So I just find it a little bit selfish to say that the only harm is at the end finding out that it was all worth nothing, because it's such a harmful path to be able to claim that you are following all the rules to begin with.
Yeah, that, and you're doomed for damnation anyway.
Yeah.
Because you can dedicate your life to the Christian God, you can do everything you need to do to be good with the Christian God, and then you die, and Allah sends you to hell for believing that Jesus was the Son of God. You don't describe to Allah partners or children. So Muslims are going to Christian hell, Christians are going to Muslim hell. And then what happens when you wake up as a cow and you realize that the Hindus were right? So Pascal's wager is a really stupid bet, and there's no way to win it. Most Christians wouldn't make it to hell most Christians wouldn't make it to heaven by their own standards.
Truly.
So practically everybody is doomed to hell. Nobody can be gullible enough. And here's the great thing: gullibility. That's it. That's your sole criteria for redemption. It has nothing to do with morality. It doesn't matter how good you are. However evil you are, all sins may be forgiven if you but believe. But if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are, because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. Yep. So you're supposed to believe incredible claims for no reason, entirely on faith. As you said, the importance of faith. You have to believe it without evidence and despite evidence. And then what you end up believing is something that we know is not true.
Yes. I will say
you've
this,
wasted your life. You've wasted everybody else's life. You've judged everybody harshly. You don't know jack about science. You have no concept of morality. You don't even know what that is. You've wasted every aspect of your life. So the thing that you've given up is everything.
Everything. I will say this though, Aron. I wake up a cow every day, and it's actually not that bad. It's really not. I'm just saying. Every day. Emmanuel, did that answer your question?
That answered my question. If I could rebuttal, that's fine. But
okay.
How could
there
you?
are a lot of things that.
What is your argument against what we had to say?
The first is I'm very tolerant. So he said that you have to be a skeptic or agnostics at some point. You can't be a Christian and tolerant. And
that's not what I said.
I
said that when people walk away. That's not what I said. I said when people walk away from faith, they find that they are more tolerant than they were as Christians.
But
Statistically, the stronger your religious belief, the worse a person you are. For child endangerment and for sexual molestation, the more religious the person is, the more and younger victims they have, the more extreme the crime. So the more religious you are, the worse you are. The less religious you are, the better you are. It's kind of a scale like that. I did not say that you can't be Christian and be a good person. That's not what I said.
What if you are like the progressive version of Christianity? How there are Christians who are very progressive, or they don't like judge people of how people live and stuff.
But that's
judge not lest ye be judged yourselves. Right. Yeah, you mean there are people who aren't utter hypocrites who actually go by their scripture, who pay their taxes like Jesus said, who actually feed the poor and welcome the stranger. There are Christians like that. They're not all hypocrites. Good to know.
What I'm saying is, like, if you have, there are like two forms of Christianity. There's Christianity on the right, there's Christianity on the left, right? There are Christians who have a better understanding of the modern world. They understand the concepts of ethics, and there are Christians who, like probably the majority one, which is on the side of a very rigid kind of like place. So if I have to make a choice, why can't I choose the progressive way of Christianity?
You can.
You can, but you still lose everything with Pascal's wager.
What
That's what we're saying
what
is you can be as
Yeah,
progressive as you
Pascal's
want.
wager
for
doesn't work.
example,
Yeah.
So when you die,
no,
and
no,
Allah turns out, when Islam turns out to be the true religion, where are you? You're in hell, right?
well, here's the thing. There is no
Yes
percent
or
chance,
no?
100%
Yes or no?
sure that
Yes or
Islam
no?
is
You die
bad.
and Islam turns out to be the true religion. Where are you?
There's no possibility that Islam could be true. That's my argument.
There's no possibility that Christianity could be true, but this is a hypothetical situation. You're believing an
No,
impossible thing. Other people believe an
most
impossible thing. So
ancient
while we're talking about impossible things, since it is not possible for Christianity to be true, because we know that you don't have a soul, therefore we can't have an afterlife. So all of this is bullshit. Then since we're in fantasy land anyway, which is where you want to live, then if you're going to go by Pascal's wager, which is the dumbest fucking argument you could come up with, then let's play it out. You die, and it turns out that Islam is the true religion. Now, where are you?
give out. Okay, but when you give out a possibility like that, you have to understand what's the highest possible religion that could be true.
Yeah, Islam is the true
Christianity
religion. Now what?
follows
If
that requirement.
Islam is the true religion and you die as a Christian, where do you go?
You'll be damned. That's the
Bingo.
answer.
Bingo.
And in a whole bunch of other religions too, and even in your own religion for past things.
Yep. I mean, well, we have
Did you
another
ever
caller.
say? Did you ever say that there was no Holy Spirit? Did you ever blaspheme the Holy Spirit? Ever?
I don't blaspheme the Holy Spirit.
Well, because you've never done that ever in your life. You've never said there is no God, there is no Holy Spirit. I don't believe in this.
blaspheme God's name like ever.
Right.
Like
So
why
you've
would I
never.
blaspheme?
Is that a yes or no question? Come on. Did you ever say yes or no? Did you ever say that there's no God or Holy Spirit?
No, I've never said there's no Holy Spirit.
Okay. I have, but you can't be forgiven for that according to your own doctrine. You can never be forgiven.
But I thought, okay, but I thought the blood of Christ washes all sins. That's
Nope.
the concept of
Nope.
Christianity.
There are 3 different places where Jesus says that you cannot ever be forgiven for blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Period.
Yeah,
God can do anything
No,
except he can't do that.
but okay, Mark's gospel. Okay,
Do you mind, because we had a topic and
Yeah.
what you're talking about isn't remotely near that topic?
Yeah, I gotta let you go, Emmanuel. We have somebody calling in on the topic, but we appreciate you calling in.
thank you
Thanks.
guys.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we're going to talk to Derek. All right, let's see. Derek, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. What's your question? Oh. Are you there? Let's see. Let me try this again. All right, there we go, Derek. I think we got your back. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, now you sound great. What was your question?
Hi. So first I want to say hi again. Sydney, I was on your podcast not too terribly long ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought I recognized your voice. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. It's good to hear from you. Hit us with it. What was it you wanted to talk about or ask about?
Yeah, so I was watching and I was reminded of something that's been going on in my life, my situation. And I'm really happy that I've seen you and Dave Warnock and a lot of other skeptics, talk about this topic, because, this is the kind of thing that a lot of people are really shy to talk about. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of hesitance, a lot of concern about, what people are going to think if you start asking these questions. And, I haven't been an atheist that long, so there's a lot of stuff to wrestling with. But, so I mostly just wanted to comment like how glad I am to see that, a lot of these skeptics are, at least brave enough to really start hashing it out and have these conversations, because, this, the reality of our society is, we don't like to admit that a lot of times we are putting other people's lives in our hands. And it's, and it's cases like this where, people use phrases like, oh, well, playing God, and, life is completely sacred, and if there's any chance to extend it, save it, then we should take it. So I'm really glad that skeptics are, really stepping up to the plate, because, we can't help but be reminded how these kind of subjects are not being held in the best of hands. And, something that really crystallized that for me was my wife has been diagnosed with a progressive disorder that causes extreme pain, and right now medication is doing quite a lot. And it's hard to see out into the future. And we have been talking about it with various people, and there's it's a rare condition, but there's a name for it, there's medication, so my wife will explain these things to people. And there was a situation that came up that my boss's wife, we kind of had a friendship going and stuff, but they it's one of those things where she's a very spiritual person, and we had this situation where there was a business party, and she said, oh, well, I feel compelled that I should pray for you, because I guess in the past she's prayed for people and they've been miraculously healed. And we were trying to avoid avoid saying overtly no, because it's my boss, and but couldn't really wiggle out of it, and eventually my wife had to be very direct about what was happening, and they had this very long, intense conversation, but it ended with her with my boss's wife saying, oh, well, maybe this is a demon.
What?
And yeah. And I'm not sure what else to say, but that's kind of like the state of things, is why we get kind of stuck in as a society with these systems and ideas and taboos that hold us back so much from actually really taking the reins and being responsible, and trying to set up real systems and laws that work for people. It's in inability or unwillingness to face reality as it is.
When we have to seriously, we have to treat seriously the suggestion that maybe it was Santa Claus. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we have to treat that seriously. Why can't we just say there's no such thing as demons, dear?
Yeah.
Go get the help that you need, take your meds, and go relax somewhere. There's no demons.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the other implication there is, to me, it almost sounds kind of victim blamey. It almost sounds like, oh, maybe this happened to you because you allowed a demon, or maybe this happened to you because you manifested this demon, as opposed to, I am so sorry that this is happening to you. I'm going to mind my own business. Like, I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. There's nothing I could say to make it better. And I am here for you if you need anything, right? Like, that's, why does it have to go to the demon aspect? And like, what if your wife had agreed? What if your wife had been like, I've been thinking that too. What do I do now? Right? Like, where do you go from there?
Maybe it was a puka.
Oh,
Do you
the
know what a
worst.
puka is?
I don't.
Anybody
It
know what a
sounds
puka?
awful.
Well, I think it's an
No.
Irish legend, but it's a 6-foot sapient rabbit that has magic powers.
You know what? I've seen Harvey, and it's a great movie, and I believe in it. So I need you to have some respect for my God. Thank you. But Derek, in all seriousness, I am so sorry to hear that about your wife. That just sounds awful, but it also sounds like she would be the type of person who had like a plan, the type of person that would say, I know what's happening, I know what's going on, I know what my future looks like, no matter how many people pray over me or ask me about all the different options. I already know what my options are, and I'm okay with that. How would we deny her then the ability to decide on her own how she chooses to then handle the future of her illness, right? And how would it be up to anybody else to make that decision for her? That would be frustrating, and that just wouldn't make any sense at all.
Right. It's, like you said, if it's one thing that she's an atheist and being, being told, well, maybe it's a demon. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine what it'd be like, even though I was a Christian, I can't imagine what it'd be like being in that situation and saying, oh, well, maybe it's a demon. Like, what kind of, horrible anxiety and guilt and whatever. And, it just kind of goes to show, like, kind of like what you were talking about, like how just the impression, the societal impression of what, how we treat medical care and how we give people choices, it's really like trying to deal with these extreme, difficult, most difficult problems kind of that there are, with, one hand tied behind our back because we are, we don't look at certain tools that we have available. We don't have those conversations. And just because we're afraid to, even bring it up with family, even bring it up with, people that we might otherwise trust. And, I just, like I said, I'm just very glad that these kind of conversations are happening because, it's very easy to get bogged down and kind of despairing about, these individual situations that are very difficult. And, but, as a society, as a species, we've got to figure out how to move forward and, start trying to put down better things for the people who come after us, regardless of this resistance and what we're facing now.
Yeah. Absolutely. I 100% agree. Derek, it's really great to hear from you. I recognized your voice instantly. It's fantastic to hear from you. And one of my favorite things about you is you talk all the time about how you're brand new to atheism and you don't feel like you've been in it long enough to have certain like opinions and ideas. And yet in my conversations with you in the past, you've had some of the most like fantastic takes and ideas and thoughts about what we were talking about. And so I think that just goes to show that you don't have to be an atheist for very long to understand human rights and like human abilities to make decisions for themselves and logic and science. And so it's just wonderful to see you here, or hear you here, I guess I should say. And it's great talking to you. I hope your journey keeps going, and I hope you find a lot of success in your journey as an atheist.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Late to the party, but doing the best that I can.
Yeah.
And a quick shout out to Aron. I explained on Sydney's show how I was raised in young Earth creationism, and finally breaking free out of that. A lot of your videos and explanations and books were very, very helpful in the healing process, and being able to switch to a stance where now I love investigating evolution and investigating science, and loving it again. You're a piece of that puzzle, so I appreciate that.
I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Derek. I'm going to head on to our next caller, but it was great to hear from you, Derek.
All right. Have a great night.
See you later. All right. Our next caller is the Fat Man. I didn't call him that. That's just what it says. Let's see. All right. Are you there?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, no problem. What can we do for you? What's your question?
Yeah, I can remember, I couldn't remember the year, but I remember voting on the Death with Dignity when it was here in Oregon. And the thing is, it wasn't as simple as we voted it in and it kicked in, because what happened was they introduced another ballot either a year or two later. And of course, until this other ballot was taken care of, Death with Dignity could not happen. And the voters voted that other ballot down. And then our senator at the time, we had Senator Jeff Gordon. He was a United States senator. He tried to block it on the federal level. And so actually, it took a while to finally kick in till we got our first Death with Dignity patient.
Interesting. And what was that like? Was that a huge deal? Was it celebrated? Was it widely panned? What was it like to kind of be on the forefront of that decision?
It was mixed. I voted for it. I agree with what you guys have been saying. Someone's terminally ill, don't make them suffer.
Yeah.
But a lot of people didn't agree with it. A lot of people wanted it blocked, wanted it taken out, and of course our Republican senator at that, our senator at that time, he did everything he could to reverse it, to get it reversed. But I'm not sure exactly what happened as a result of that, but I do know that he wasn't successful.
Interesting. And honestly, that sounds like maybe a good thing. That's very interesting. And then has it been primarily successful since its implementation?
I rarely hear about it.
Yeah.
To be honest, I haven't even thought about it for quite a few years until I just heard you guys talking about it in Oregon. I thought other states had adopted it. Is Oregon the only one?
Oregon and Washington, and then DC was trying to adopt it, but it was stopped by Republican voters. And those are the only three that I've heard of that have it. I think California was considering adopting it, and they might still be, but I don't believe you can have that. You can have like Death with Dignity programs in California at the moment.
Okay. Well, I know in Oregon it's very rare. I didn't look it up how many we've had, but it's rare when it's even done, because there is so much, there are so many loopholes that you have to go through.
And not only that,
what
but
do they call it? What do they call it? Right, because we know that they're not calling it Death with Dignity. What are they? Celebrated suicide? What is their slam? Because they've got to have some way of spinning it to try to make it sound negative, even though they would love to have the option, because we know about the hypocrisy here. They will lobby against abortion forever until, and I was on a train in Scotland when I was listening to all these people talk about this, about some American senator who got exposed by asking his mistress to get an abortion. This is somebody who is voting against abortion, but he's asking his mistress to get an abortion so that
Yep.
his wife won't find out she cheated on him. And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want anybody to recognize that I had an American accent, because that would be humiliating in a foreign country.
Yes. Yeah. And I have a story about going to Scotland and having a dumb accent, but I'm not going to tell it here. But yeah, I think it's really cool. It's neat to hear from your perspective as somebody who lives in the state. Now, I will say this: I'm not surprised to find out that you don't actually hear about it, because there is a lot of literature online on their website about how it's incredibly private when it is used, and how the doctors in charge of administering the medication or prescribing the medication are legally actually not allowed to tell anyone else that that's how you chose to go. So I'm not surprised at all that it doesn't make the news, because it's actually, according to their website, it's incredibly private. And once you've made this decision and you elect to basically self euthanize, they're not even allowed to tell your family members. It mentions on their website that they recommend that people tell their family that's what they're doing, but that there's no legal expectation to have told any family members, any guardians, anything. You could theoretically go have it done and nobody would ever know that's how you died. They would just find out how you died. And I think they even had a thing on it that said they're not even allowed to put it on your death certificate. I could have misread that aspect, but it actually doesn't surprise me at all that you don't hear about them very often publicly. I imagine that would be a large HIPAA violation.
I didn't know that. Yeah. I just remember when it was going up for being voted on. I voted on it. I voted it in, and then I remember, I don't know if, I think it was the next year, they actually brought up a ballot measure to basically, if it went through, it would make death with dignity illegal again. It would undo what the first ballot measure did. And
That's
it didn't
ludicrous.
pass. In fact, I think it got down by more than the death with dignity got voted in on.
Good.
And then the senator tried to block it.
Yeah, that's wild. That is wild. Well, thanks for calling in and telling us about that. It's really interesting to hear from your kind of first person perspective on what that's like. And thank you for voting for it as well. I wish that I lived in a state that cared what I had to say about it, but I appreciate that you voted for it. And every step in that direction is a step in the right direction. And I hope you never have to use it. But if you do, I hope it's something you get to choose for yourself.
I appreciate that. Thank you for taking my call. I appreciate talking to you. And Aron Ra, I've been following you for years. I love you to death, ma'am.
Thank you very kindly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for calling in. We've got another caller, but before we let that caller on, I need to address this slanderous comment. No, I'm not a vampire, but thank you. Thank you so much. Although some of my exes would disagree. They would be like, she absolutely sucks the life out of everyone. All right, let's see. Our next caller, Alma, is calling in. Oh, this is Alma. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. What's your question?
I want to let you guys know about something that has been going on, and social networks and stuff that regarding extreme cases that has been using right now to say, what they're doing is wrong.
So you mean like extreme cases where they say like you can't use euthanization because things go wrong or people use it nefariously?
Yeah, I've seen another one article in particular that it says that are Canadians being driven to assisted suicide just because of a healthcare crisis? And this is kind of saying that because people are poor and people are not having their needs met, even if they are not in in a really bad situation, they have been pushed to be to use the assisted care and dying just because they don't have money.
Yeah, so I actually read an article very similar to what you're talking about. And what I gleaned, and this is from an American who does not live in Canada, it sounded like they are facing a similar thing like we're facing, where it's a left versus right thing. And the Canadian version of the right wing is trying to push that narrative where they're saying they want to make it legal because they want to euthanize all the poor people, the homeless people, the sick people. I even read a couple articles where they were trying to claim that that hospitals would euthanize people on purpose who could theoretically survive, but they just want to get rid of them and have space in the beds and space in the hospitals. And while I understand why people who don't know much or maybe have access to as much as we have with the internet, how they might be worried about that, how people might say their first question might be, well, how do I get my, uncle who hates me to not euthanize me, if he has that opportunity. I think what they're facing is the same thing, where half of them, their version of the left is saying we need this implemented because people deserve the right to die with dignity, and the right is saying no, you're just doing this so we can get rid of all the sick people because we're having a healthcare crisis right now and you just want to clear all these beds out. So I don't know, as an American, I don't know how true that is. I'm not in Canada. I have no idea if hospitals are just chucking people, but I feel like that is the exact same argument the right here in the United States is making, and it's just the most popular one that gets the biggest headlines in terms of voting against something like this.
Yeah, they're saying it's being used to get rid of poor people because there is people who need care that is very expensive.
Yeah.
So they will be pushed into that option instead of getting the care they need.
Well, and
let us see. We could treat you. You could suffer, or would you like to kill yourself?
Yeah.
Well, and also nowhere have I read that this is a free service. So a lot of times when conservatives are like, oh no, you're just going to pick this so you don't have to pay for expensive healthcare, I'm willing to bet it's probably expensive to euthanize yourself. I can actually look it up right now, but nowhere have I seen that it's free. It's not a free service. It's not something that you don't have to pay for. Insurance doesn't even cover it, apparently.
I wonder if you can finance it.
With how do they expect to get those last payments? That's my question. It's who's paying those last payments? I will take the 36-month one, please, and set my date for a month from now. Thank you. I'm actually going to Google it right now to find out.
Yeah, somebody posted some statistics in the chat. Of course, I have no way to check these, but it says Doorknob Head post, since Death with Dignity passed in 1997 in Oregon, 3,280 people got prescriptions, 2,159 people, 66%, died from ingesting the medications. During 2021, DWA or DWDA estimated that 0.59% of total deaths in Oregon, so less than 1%. It's not realistic to think that everybody that is sick for any reason or whatever, or maybe they're not even sick. Maybe they're just like, "Hi, I'd like to kill myself.
Yeah,
Can
they're
I have
just
the
sick of
pill,
my
please?"
shit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I've seen this tactic, they're using it a lot. They just take one or two cases that seem very extreme, and they're, oh, look, this is what is going to happen to everybody.
Yep. And
I think that's just a tactic they use to get people scared and get people to vote against stuff like this that is necessary.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I heard a joke recently that said nobody fears events that have never happened quite like a Republican, which I thought was hilarious.
Indeed.
Well, Alma,
and they don't want you. Interestingly, they don't want you to know what has happened either.
right.
The GOP wants to not treat past history. They don't want you to know what our country has already done. They want you to fear what could happen, but we know what could happen. It's already happened. They don't want you to know that part.
Yep. And Douglas Sharon says, what's worse, euthanasia or abortion? I say, give me both. Thank you. Preferably on the same payment plan. Well, Alma,
people is going to do it just for funsies. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Fun.
have an abortion this month just for fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Been there,
If we're
done
doing
that.
it just
was a
for fun,
blast.
then let's have a roller coaster that just ends with the car smashing into the ground.
You know, I would pay to see that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, people will pay to do skydiving, right? Do it. No parachute
Oh, yeah.
necessary.
I will skydive once without a parachute.
Yes. I will say, I do think that I know this is the second time I've brought up Monty Python tonight. I don't do this normally, I swear, but they did have it right when they had that sketch about how people who were condemned to death could pick how they die, and that guy chose to be chased off a cliff by topless rollerbladers. Like, I feel like death with dignity means you should pick how you get to go. I think you should get to, if I want to be chased off a cliff by women who don't have shirts on and are wearing roller skates, I should be able to do that with dignity, in my opinion.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not often that they have it right, but I feel like
And
they
it's
had
the
it right
same
then.
people again who are all about the death penalty for every damn thing. Now let's think about
Right?
this logically. for a moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so all these religious believers, I mean, most murderers think there's a God. There's a God who perfectly understood exactly why that punk deserved whatever you did to him.
Yep.
Their God is their personal God, so their God has already forgiven them for what they did. Their God has assured them that, hey, I understand why you did the thing you did. I've already forgiven you for it, and and you could get out of prison. All you got to do is die, and then you'll be seated at my right hand in heaven forever.
Yep.
For all eternity, just having a good old time. So these people get out of their prison sentence by going where they think they're going to be in this better place. And we have to find some humane way to do this. And we can't seem to find a humane way. Rolling on the anesthetic? Well, we can't do that for prisoners, can we?
No.
I would think a double-barreled shotgun to the back of the head would probably be pretty damned efficient.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, dropping a 16-ton weight on your forehead might do the trick too.
Yeah. If I want to dress like a deer and be killed by Dick Cheney, I should be allowed to do that. I should be allowed to do that with dignity.
Be shot by Dick Cheney.
With dignity. That's what I want. And if you tell me no, then you are inhumane and you are not pro-life. But, well, Alma, we have another caller that I have to rush over to before they hang up, but it was great to hear from you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you. I just want to add one thing.
Yeah.
I heard earlier that there was a comparison between Aron Ra and Jesus. And I just want to say that the guy was great, but it's not Aron Ra.
That's really
Thank
funny.
you so much for that. By the way, this is named after a Greek god named Eurynomy. That's how we pronounce it, Eurynomy. And you see, this is a Dumeral's boa. You see all these masks, these tiki masks along the side? I refer to these as the souls of the damned.
I love it. I love it. Hardcore. Hardcore. All right. Our next caller is Wise Ape. Again, they call themselves that. I'm not just being mean to these people. I'm not coming up with names. Wise Ape, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Hit us with it. What's your question?
Well, I just wanted to say I deconverted from Christianity probably as a teenager, and that's probably when I got indoctrinated into the idea that immortality is a good thing, right? So as I deconstructed, that appendage or whatever continued on, like my idea and fascination with immortality. And so science fiction, I also am a big fan of, and I realized that if becoming an atheist, though, I became comfortable with mortality.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of neat. However, with science fiction, we have the tools to actually achieve immortality through like AGI or some sort of simulation, okay? Where religion, I think we really need to start adding the suffix fiction to the end of it. Religious fiction, just like science fiction. Whereas science fiction actually has the potential to be true. The only reason it's not true is it's just they made a fictional story about something, you know. So it's an event that didn't really happen, but it potentially could happen. Where religious fiction is
this
just
Tom
dead.
Cruise?
It's never
Are we
going to
talking to Tom
provide
Cruise right now?
immortality. What's that?
I said, am I talking to Tom Cruise right now? Is this Scientology? I'm just messing with you. I'm just playing with
No,
you.
it's not Scientology. But you know, it's okay. We could become comfortable with death with dignity. But I just feel like, yes, throughout history, that was our only option, was to die.
Yeah.
But now in our current age, I think we have an option not to die. You know, we'll see what technology can provide. Religion, as far as we can tell, never provided any immortality to anybody ever. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have the audacity not to include fiction on the end of their religion. Where science, they came out quite honestly and said, hey, this is science fiction.
Yeah.
But what can we glean from that? It actually has the potential to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. You know, you said yourself, all throughout time, we've had no other choice but to die. And now we have the technology to choose how we die and when we die and how humanely we die, right? Or in your example, maybe we don't die. Science fiction maybe provides us with a way we don't, but now we have the technology we need to have the best, smoothest, most chill death possible. And there are people literally voting no, which is crazy. And it shouldn't even, to me, it shouldn't even be a voting issue. It's like, if you don't want it, then don't do it, right? But I feel like that's the majority of the issues, especially in America, is half the country says mind your own business and let people do whatever they want to do, and the other half says no, we should legislate all of those things. So it's wild that in our time right now, we have the easiest way to die available to us, and people are just allowed to vote no. It's just crazy to me. It's crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense how the same people who would vote no also vote for the death penalty. Yes. And it's just interesting to interact with minds like that, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, they're pro-life because they support the Bible, except that the Bible is pro-abortion. And
they don't even realize it.
Yep.
Or maybe they do and they just lie about it.
I share your frustration. I've talked with a lot of theists myself, you know, coming from a theist background, and they just, you give them what they ask for and they just move on to, you know, they keep sliding the goalposts until you can't talk to them anymore.
Yep.
I like how they always do well, let's talk about this other thing. When you've proved that they were wrong about the last thing. No, let's get an admission that you were wrong about this last thing. So we can start building a list of things you were wrong about. Because you're looking for a thing where you were going to start with, when you finally find something I was wrong about, that'll be the thing. So you'll also be able to say I was wrong about this, but you're ignoring all of your own failures here. So like this one, I had my boss's boss at the last job that I had brought me into his office for that argument after many years of us working together. He was an evangelical.
That's a mistake.
And he says, well, how do you explain this? And I start explaining. So he interrupts the answer to ask another question. Well, how do you explain that? So I start explaining that. And he interrupts that answer to ask something else. Eventually, he had something to, you know, like, well, what happened before the Big Bang? And I have to change to say, well, nobody knows. And he goes, see, you come to a point where you don't have an answer. And I said, see, you started from a point where you never had the answer to any of these questions. You didn't have the answer, and I did. And so you're always wrong, and that's where you are. And you won't even acknowledge. You never had an answer. And you don't have one now either. God magic is not an answer.
Yep. And that man died that day. And it was not a death with dignity.
I would love to popularize, you know, to make it common language to call, you know, when people talk about their religion, to call it religious fiction. Like, because they say, oh, why do you care if I believe a certain thing? And it's like, well, let's examine your beliefs. Your beliefs say anyone who isn't a believer is not only deserving of death, but eternal torment. So,
and they're being denied rights. They're being denied their rights here and now too.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's not like, oh, just let people believe whatever they want. They're demonizing everybody outside their faith. And they think it's real.
Everybody in grade school, not just about science, but also about sex and social studies. They're perverting the history so that it's not history, so that they can promote the myth of American exceptionalism. They're actually doing a worse job in science, or excuse me, in social studies than they're doing in science. But they're perverting everything so that nobody knows anything properly. No one has any understanding what the hell they're talking about, because they've celebrated this thing where being unreasonable is considered a virtue.
Yep.
Believing impossible nonsense for no good reason is virtuous. And then refusing to be reasoned with is strength somehow.
Yes. Because they're pro-life. That's how they are pro-life. That's why. I don't know how you can't understand that, Aron. We've explained
because they
so
believe in
many
a God
times.
that commands the death penalty for everything, including working on weekends.
Oh shit. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Well, Wise Ape, thank you so much for calling in. We really appreciate getting to chat with you, and you bringing up some pretty interesting points.
Well, thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
You guys have a great night. And
See you later. Have a great one.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Oh, bye. Perfect. And I just want to take a second to address some of our super chats that have come in. We've gotten so many. For example, Frankenstein, he says their fears control them so that they want you to feel controlled and to control your life and death. That's why they don't want anybody to die with dignity until I bet it becomes their turn and suddenly they have a reason for it. And then we have Mark, who says, I'd rather have Blitzo and IMP crew take me out, especially if Luna is involved. That is the death that they would choose. What death would you choose, Aron? What would you pick if you could go out any way that you wanted?
Tough call. It depends on my physical capability.
Yeah.
But I mean, jumping out of an airplane with no parachute is one option. I'm sure that'll be pretty effective.
Yeah.
But honestly, if you want a painless death that isn't dramatic, just roll on too much anesthetic. Let me say my piece. Let me make my delegate whatever has to be done, and then nod that it's time, and close the door.
So I should call off Dick Cheney then. He should not. You don't want him to come. Okay, I'll give him a shout. I'll give him a call. Any last comments or anything in the chat? Any questions anybody has? Any points they want to make? We'd love to hear from you before we wrap it up here in a couple minutes. Just a reminder, this is Skeptic Haven's Let's Talk. This show is every Sunday. We love to have people call in. Thank you so much for the super chats. If you're interested in this kind of content and you've enjoyed what you've seen, there's multiple shows all week long. You can check out their channel. You can support them on Facebook, on Patreon, on Twitter. Right here, Secular Soapbox on Wednesdays, Thursdays, The Sunny Spot, Saturday, The Global Atheists and Women Atheists Unloaded, and then Let's Talk on Sundays. They're also looking for help, just a reminder. So if you're interested in doing the behind the scenes tech, like my friends have been here with the comments and things like that, they would love to hear from you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Send a bird, I guess, if you want. Send a pigeon, however works best for you. But Aron, any last thoughts on death with dignity or anything you want us to leave with today?
Well, I'm a little apprehensive when we were talking about death with dignity for a couple of hours, and then you asked me if I have any last thoughts. Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Wow,
Yeah,
wow.
I think it's a little disappointing that we allow prisoners a way to escape their prison sentences, and we showed more dignity to dogs than we show to people who request a better way out.
Yep.
And that we do this on the grounds of moral outrage or just declaiming morality at all, when clearly that's the people who are pro-life, not so much.
They're not. Nope.
It's kind of like when the moral majority declared themselves to be, but they're neither moral nor the majority. And how many people have we had that are part of some family organization? Because any Christian group that's a member of a family organization with the word family in the name, it means that they hate gays because they have family values, right? So family values means that you hate gays, and Christian values means that you hate every other religion. And, you know, patriotic values means you hate basically everybody else. And so values translates as a prejudice against other people.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So I don't understand the whole claim of morality from these people. They're not evaluating a moral situation and realizing what would be the right thing to do in this case. And very often they know what the right thing to do is, but they're not going to do it.
Nope. 100%. To me, it's even if you have some weird moral stance against it, if it's not costing you money, if it doesn't impact you, if I'm not scheduling your euthanization, and if it doesn't impact your daily life, it's not your business. Like baseline, it's just not your business. You shouldn't worry about what other people are doing. If gays are getting married, don't get gay married. If people are euthanizing themselves, don't euthanize yourself. If people are getting abortions, just don't. It is that easy. Just don't euthanize yourself, and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, if you want death with dignity in a Republican dominated world, commit a crime.
Yeah. Literally though, just commit a crime. Yeah, 100%. And I also think that the people who vote against death with dignity didn't read the part where nobody else can petition for your death, and they're just really worried because they're shitty people, and they know there's a lot of people out there who would definitely petition for their euthanization ASAP. Well, this has been wonderful, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this live stream and for calling in. We really appreciate having you call in. We would love to hear your calls more often, so feel free to call in again in the future if you didn't tonight. Thank you for the super chats. And for anybody who might have subscribed to the channel during this conversation, we really appreciate you. And Aron, we appreciate you. Thank you for joining me for this chat. I'm glad we got to follow up and have this conversation because I think it's really important. And I think it touches a lot more people than they realize. Personally.
And this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, but I rarely get an opportunity to address this. This is not a topic a lot of people want to discuss.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, but I think it's one of those conversations that need to be had. So thank you for helping me lead that discussion. I appreciate you. And with everybody, that's the end just of the show, not of everybody. It's not the end. It's just the end of the show. Just the end of the show. Roll. Is there an end credit or I don't.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.